Making Your Marriage Work with your host, Steve and Connie Corona.
Hello, welcome to Making Your Marriage Work. I'm Connie Corona.
And I'm Steve Corona. Today we're doing the first in a series of 3 programs on intimacy. And here in the studio with us today we have Mark Gungor. Mark is a really good friend of Connie's and mine. Mark has a ministry called Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage with his wife Debbie. They travel all over the United States and even some other parts of the world ministering on marriage. They also pastor New Beginnings Church in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. Mark, it's good to have you with us here today.
Good to be here.
It's good to have you. I want to start right off by asking you why it's important to talk about this subject of intimacy or sex. Why Christians would we even want to tune into a program about sex in marriage? Why is that important?
Well, just you saying that word bumped your ratings right there. Because everybody's interested. Everybody has to deal with this issue. Right. And it's an issue that most churches don't like to talk about. Most pastors feel very uncomfortable for obvious reasons, and they don't hear a lot of information about it.
Well, now you say obvious reasons, that they feel uncomfortable for obvious reasons, but Hollywood doesn't feel uncomfortable talking about sex, and I mean, we see it all the time, and even pop-ups on our websites. I mean, sex is everywhere. What's the problem with the church in dealing with this whole aspect of sex?
Yeah, I don't know. You're right. You're absolutely right. We don't talk about it, and they have no problem talking about it in every shape and form and just throwing it in our faces constantly. So if they're always talking about it and we're never talking about it, whose message is getting out there? It's Hollywood's message. And Hollywood's message has absolutely infiltrated not only our culture, but the church culture. Most Christians think like Hollywood when it comes to this issue. And it's very sad.
If Christians need information about sex and the church is not giving it to them, there's only one other avenue to get it, and that's from the world and from Hollywood.
Yeah, that's what's happening today.
So that's what's happening. So, but now, being pastors, I think all of us are probably confronted with, not necessarily confronted with, but all of us have been exposed to many, many couples who don't think that sex is an important subject in their marriage. I mean, there are couples that are watching our program today. They've got good jobs, nice cars, nice home, kids are in good schools, everything's going great. Their sex life is not going all that great, but we're in a good church and everything seems to be going well. So do we really need to pay that much attention to this area of our lives?
Who's telling you that?
No, really.
Women, probably. I hear that a lot from women.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Women who think of sex as a side issue. You know, there's our marriage, and then there's our relationship, and our fellowship, and our communication, right. And sex is kind of a side issue, but they're really missing it. Sex is really a central issue in marriage, biblically, and it's just the fact. And the women who look at it as a side issue create all this tension. I promise you, the women who are saying that, their husband isn't thinking that at all. They're not thinking, oh, everything's fine, you know.
Sure. Okay, well, so if the husbands aren't thinking that things are fine, but the women are thinking that things are fine, then there's some miscommunication when it comes to this whole area of sex between the couples.
Oh, without question. Without question. And the sad thing is, either men will respond 2 ways about sex if they're not getting it. They'll either start fighting with their wives, arguing with their wives, which is really the better scenario. I mean, better that your husband starts arguing with you, because then it keeps it on the front table. Or he begins to shut down sexually. A lot of psychologists say that for men, if they get even as little as 5, 6 no's in a row, will actually begin to shut down sexually, and it actually pulls the relationship downward.
Okay. All right. So how do we deal with this? How do we begin here on television a dialogue about? I mean, we've already begun the dialogue, but how do we get into this whole subject of we've been talking about? Here's what we need to talk about. Here are some of the issues, and people who don't think they have issues sexually probably do. So where do we begin in actually beginning to help people to deal with this whole idea of sex in their marriage?
Well, I think you started a good place with the whole idea of what Hollywood culture has done with us. And as soon as we say that, we immediately think in terms of pornography or something, sexual. But it's not just that side of it. That's male pornography. I think a big part of it, and almost a bigger part of it, is what I call female pornography. And that is romance novels and soap operas and all this stuff. Both of them create a totally unrealistic picture. See, in male pornography, a man is taking visual images of another woman and replacing that for his wife. And in female pornography, a woman's taking romantic images, and replacing that for her real husband. And they're both off in Mars somewhere. I mean, neither one of them is realistic, and both are very destructive. So where I start with the whole thing, I pick more initially just on this whole female pornography thing, that women today have a completely unrealistic expectation of romance. They just expect that their husbands would automatically do all these wonderful things for them, and they shouldn't have to do anything, because if he really loved me, I shouldn't have to ask, which is ludicrous, okay? Where do they get that from? They get that from these romantic images of these imaginary men that, want to stay all this emotionally engaged with their wives. It's sad. You were talking earlier about how this is affecting church couples. There was a survey done in, I think it was Christian Marriage Partnership Magazine, I think about a year ago. They did a survey, said, how many times in the last week did you and your spouse make love? The number one answer among people of faith was 0.
Wow.
Stop and think about that. Among Christians, if there's any people in the world who ought to have this area together, it ought to be people of faith. Yeah. But from my perspective, Christians ought to be known for having great sex lives, The world might say, I don't know about these stupid Christians, but well, they got great sex lives. If nothing else, that ought to make them come to church, check us out. But when we are acting and thinking just like the world in this area, and it is destructive. Then you've got the male pornography side of it. Survey after survey is showing that 50% of the men in our congregations, that's every other guy, has a sexual addiction.
Wow.
It's horrible.
Yes.
And we don't want to talk about it, so we hide and we kind of pretend things don't exist, and we're not helping our people. We've got to address these issues. But the biggest challenge facing us is this whole picture, both sexually and emotionally, on both sides, that are completely out of the picture, completely unrealistic, and it's destroying people.
In order to convince people of what, and I'm convinced, that's why I'm having you on the program, Connie and I are having you on the program, because we really like your ministry, and toward the end of the program, we want to let you know how you can get in touch with his ministry on his website. He's got a great website and some great tools on there for your marriage. But I still think, as a pastor, there are people that are listening to this, and you're talking about Christians having great sex lives, and Christians even being known for having great sex lives. And how do you justify that with the Bible? I'm sure there are people that are watching this that are thinking, this guy's wacko. Where does the Bible?
But amazing there.
Sure, but what does the Bible say about it? The Bible's about love and faith and prayer and Holy Spirit and healing, and where are you getting all this sex stuff out of the Bible?
Oh my gosh, it's all over the place. Start with the Old Testament, Song of Solomon. It's one of the most blatantly sexual books of ancient writing, much less the Bible. Just ancient writing to any heathens. Song of Solomon is blatantly sexual. It's a lot of it's very poetic. They're talking about pomegranates in bloom and secret gardens, and at first glance you think, boy, these people sure are into gardening, but it's not about gardening. They're talking about romance and sex, and it's very explicit. But for hundreds of years, the church has tried to convince Christians it's not about sex. How many
that
of us
book is not about sex.
Yeah, it's not about. It's about Christ and the church, or other things. Now, you can make the analogy if you want. You can make the analogy of anything in the Old Testament to the New Testament. But I promise you, when he was writing those words, he wasn't thinking about Jesus in your Sunday school. He was thinking about sexual intimacy with this woman. And they're both chasing each other all over the place in the book. There's blatant sexual references in Ezekiel that are so gross and so blatant. I don't even quote them, and I quote almost anything. And it's God in the first person, Call me, I'll tell you what they are. But it's really amazing. And then in the New Testament, Paul said, absolutely forbid sexless marriages. He said that your body doesn't belong to just you. He says the only reason for Christians not to be sexually active is for prayer and fasting. And based on that survey, I guess everybody in America is praying and fasting because nobody's having sex. I mean, this is, and it's not. What it is they're mad at each other. You know, she's mad at him, he's mad at her. They're too caught up in it. They're too busy, yeah. But they've got to make this, if you don't make this a priority in your life, you're going to have a mess. That's one of the reasons that, you know, it's maddening sometimes because you talk about these things and a lot of pastors that I'll talk to look at me like I just dropped in from Mars, you know, and people defend the way that we've been doing things. But if we're doing stuff right, we'd have the statistics to show it.
Right.
When the truth of the matter is the divorce rate among Christians is as bad, or in a lot of places now is worse than non-Christians. In fact, one of the most strong rebukes I saw from the last election that we had, because they talked about the red states, blue states, you know, about, you know, liberal versus conservative, you know, liberal versus Bible Belt. Do you know the divorce rate in the Bible Belt is much higher than in the liberal areas of the country? And in fact, the most liberal area of the country, Massachusetts state, has one of the lowest divorce rates in America.
Wow.
I mean, what is that saying? We are so upside down on this thing. If we have got to start challenging the way that we're talking about these things, the way we're thinking about them, because we're not doing it right, and we're not getting the right results, and people's lives are getting messed up as a result.
Wow, wow. How much do you think, though, that sex, or the lack thereof, how much of an effect do you think that has on the divorce rate? We hear that most divorces are because of financial problems, or they're because of communication problems, and how much of that do you think has to do with sex?
Well, first of all, those whole excuses that they come up for divorce, reasons for divorce, drive me crazy, because they're not reasons for the divorce, they're excuses for a divorce. Okay. And you know how they get those statistics? They go ask people who've been divorced, why did you get divorced? Well, we were too young. And then they write that down as a reason. Like that's not a reason. That's just an excuse. Or, why did you get a divorce? We didn't have enough money. Who has enough money? Whoever has had enough, you know, how many of you ever gotten a paycheck from your boss and went, you know, I got enough. I don't know what to do with it, you know? Sure. I mean, nobody has enough money. The whole thing is ludicrous and absurd. These are all just side issues. There's only really one major reason for divorce, is that either one person or both of them become extremely selfish and become self-centered. That's it. You can start looking for, we were too young, we didn't have enough money, or blah, 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 blah. But those are not issues. Now, the whole issue of sex can add to the frustration of the communication between a husband and wife. Okay. Because if you're not connecting in that area, then what's holding you together?
Yeah.
The kids? You know, the job? I mean, then you are in trouble, because if the job's doing lousy, then your marriage is going to go down. See? If money's holding you together, yeah, well then in that case, they're on the wrong foundation then. Everything's all messed up.
Right. Okay, so what part, I want you to explore this whole idea of communication and sex. You mentioned sex being a part of the communication between a husband and wife. How do those two things fit together?
Well, if you're doing it right, you know, and it's, and there's the problem. So many people are not doing it right. So many men are not doing it right. You know, when it comes to the area of sex, a man is supposed to be a lover to his wife. You know, a lot of guys get mad because their wives aren't as just, you know, turned on as they are. But the reality is, women do have sexual desire in them. It's a man's job to be a lover to her and awaken that desire. But a lot of men are lazy, and they don't want to do that. And then they, because of getting involved in pornography and stuff, it changes their perspective. What happens when a man is a lover, he focuses on her. When a man has been affected by pornography, he focuses on him. And a lot of these guys now, I had a woman come in my office, I don't know, several weeks ago. A young lady, very attractive, okay? They're talking to my office, and she says to me, my husband hasn't had sex with me in over a year. course, I'm looking at him like, what, are you, an idiot? You know, this is a gorgeous woman, you know. Went on to explain that all he was interested in was her doing things to him. See, the focus, and then, of course, right away, you know, pornography's involved. You start talking, and of course, he's into all this stuff and checking out the internet and everything else. It twists people's heads. Instead of him being a lover to her, it becomes about him. Well, if it's about you, then there is no need for communication. There's just, hey, baby, you know, come on. Hey, you awake? You know, that's their idea of romance, you know, knuckleheads. That's the damaging thing of this whole pornography thing. But if you're a lover to this woman, how do you be a lover and not have to communicate? See, because she'll force you to communicate, which is why that's there. I mean, a lot of guys get frustrated. You know, why do I have this strong sex drive? The sex drive is God's way of constantly slapping you and saying, "Hey, be nice to her.
Yeah.
Pay attention to her. Communicate to her." See, because without that, you ain't going to get the sex drive satisfied. Right. That's how it actually fosters the communication. If you do it right, if you're being a lover. But if you're just looking for someone to service you, you know, which is another reason why sex lives go south. She's not going to want to do that. She doesn't want to be used like that. You know, so that's why this whole pornography thing gets so destructive. And you know why guys are so caught up in pornography? Because the promise is that this is how you can have great sex. Right. That the more you get in pornography, the better your sex life will be. If there is one lie that is absolutely pouring out of Hollywood, is that the key to great sex is lust. The more that you lust, the more that you fantasize, oh, this is really the key. And guys get caught up in this. But the reality is, it's a puking lie. In fact, guys who are involved in it, I mean, just ask yourselves, you guys who are watching pornography and checking out all the babes and looking at the internet and stuff, let me ask you a question. How's your sex life? How's that working for you? It's not. You know it's not. The reality is the more men get involved in that, the worse their sex life becomes. You would think we'd get a clue, but we don't. So instead, they just keep getting more and more into it, and it creates greater separation. It becomes all about the physical, so there is no communication. You know, it's a mess. And then on the women's side, so they get these huge romantic expectations, think that sex shouldn't be a part of it, and the gap just keeps getting wider and wider. And they're off on the edges, and now what do they got? They live under the same house, you know. You know, women have got to understand that you cannot neglect this area of your life. And guys have got to understand that just trying to service themselves isn't the key either. I mean, see, that's why if you do the sex thing right and you face it right, it pulls people together. The only way to do it right is if you get on the same page. That's the beauty of it, and that's what God intended from the beginning.
So now we're back to communication, being able to communicate with each other.
Yeah, and talking about these things, and a lot of people don't want to talk about them. They feel uncomfortable about them. And it depends on their expectations. I mean, if a guy's head has been totally in the toilet with pornography, where do you begin the conversation on her end? I mean, it's hard. And if her head's way off in some romantic nonsenseville, that sex isn't a part of it, it should just be about romance and sharing, you know, or she's considering sex some kind of a side issue, where does he start? You know, that's where it comes into our place as ministers of the gospel, where we need to get up and start challenging and saying, hey, stop it. You know, we've got to get on the same page. Ladies, you've got to be sexually active with your husbands. This is not a side issue in a marriage, it is a central issue. Guys, get your head out of the toilet. It is wrecking your marriage. Be a lover to this woman, because that's how you'll get your needs met. But we've got to have enough courage to talk about that stuff from the pulpit. I don't have a problem talking with it. Keeps everybody awake.
and so I've got you here to talk about it for me, so I don't have to deal with it.
No, you're doing great.
Which is not true. We deal with it some, but I appreciate having you on here. In next week's program, we're going to continue talking about intimacy, and we're going to help you deal with some of the issues about intimacy that we've raised today. But right now, I want to talk with you, Connie. I appreciate Mark being on the program, and I appreciate the things that he shared with us. But I want to know how you feel being a woman on the set here with two men talking about sex. You're sitting right here between two men. We're talking about sex, And I want to know, how do you feel about this as a woman? I mean, as a man, I'm sitting here going, yes, I understand what he's saying. I agree with what he's saying. I've either dealt with or myself or helped other men deal with some of the issues that he's talking about. But as far as a woman is concerned, how do you feel about the things that he's saying? I mean, is this right? Is this correct, the information that he's given us from a woman's standpoint?
As I look at the scriptures, particularly in the Song of Solomon, I notice the way that the man relates to the woman and the woman relates to the man. And it makes me realize that as Christian women, we have a tendency to over-spiritualize sex. We also have a tendency to feminize it. We think that men think the way we do. And we have to come to realize that they have a whole different perspective on sex and on marriage relationship and that sort of thing. And so as you read through the Song of Solomon, you're going to see that there's not a whole lot spiritual going on in the actual relationship that's going on between this man and woman. They're not thinking a whole lot about God in the middle of this book. They're thinking about each other. Well, I think that listening to what Mark has to say, we women are able to realize that men just don't think the way we do, and that we need to change the way we communicate with them to relate to them better.
Okay, that's good. You know, we've talked several times on this program about the feminization of the church and how so much of church has been designed to appeal to women. And there's not a lot at church that appeals to men or attracts men. So, you know, you alluded to that a moment ago, and I appreciate the pastors. I applaud the pastors who are willing to talk about these issues, not just issues about sex and intimacy, but also willing to, in a sense, try to defeminize their church and make it more man-friendly. Mark, we have a couple of minutes left here in the program, and I'd like for you to talk with the people at home about your website. Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage has a great website. You've got some great resources. Why don't you tell the TV audience about your website?
Well, thanks. I do a seminar called Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage, and it's a very different seminar. You were talking about the feminization of the church. I really fight that pretty hard.
Well, you've been at our church twice and done this, and it's been really, really good.
It's a scream. Now, you people are great. But I deal with these issues from a man's perspective. I call my seminar the perfect seminar for men because they don't have to do anything.
Just show up.
Just show up. You know, they don't have to, fill out workbooks, and they don't have to write love letters to their wives. And there's a lot of seminars that do that. God bless them. I don't, because I can't stand it, and most men don't like that kind of stuff. Just talk to us straight, that kind of thing. But we do it in a way that's fun and it gets couples laughing. I have a DVD called Laugh Your Way to a Better Marriage that you can get on our website. And it's great because it takes some of these issues that couples struggle with and it's hard for them to talk about, but it makes it very fun, it gets them laughing, and it gets them talking.
Okay, tell them your web address.
It's www.laughyourway.com.
Okay, that web address is on your screen right now, so be sure to go to that web address and check out the resources they have. That's all of our time for today. For Making Your Marriage Work, I'm Steve Corona.
And I'm Connie Corona. Work on your marriage this week. It is worth it.
We believe that this edition of Making